Shoot me, human! Shoot me!
Oh, I will, you foul creature of the night.
You'd be granting me peace.
Why's that? Keep you from eating more babies?
What in the name of all that's right are you talking about, human?
You eat babies. You have to survive. Everyone knows that. Ain't your fault.
We eat berries and mushrooms, you fool! We
Alright, welcome back to Honored Madman, and today we're going to be talking about one of the most common enemies in Elden Ring, the Demi-Humans. So these guys come in various shapes and sizes, and their appearances are about as diverse as it gets, but the one thing they all have in common, aside for their love of string, is that when night falls, their blood boils, making them rather unreasonable. And I can't exactly specify why this phenomenon happens. If I were to throw a wild speculation out there right now, I would say maybe they have some association with the fallen sun realm, but there's no basis for that. And despite their outward primitive appearance, they actually seem to be smarter than they look, given their ability to, at the very least, craft fire grenades. It's probably what they're using all that string for. Anyway, though, they're certainly an aggressive race of beings. They're fiercely territorial, and that seems to be the main thing that gets them into trouble sometimes. They'll go to war with basically anyone over seemingly territorial reasons, but if approached during the day, they aren't completely feral, mindless beasts. They're actually capable of speech, or at the very least, Bach was. They seemingly craft their rudimentary gear and apparel out of scavenged or hunted materials. But as I mentioned earlier, there are plenty of subtypes of demi-human, a lot of different varieties, so let's go over them real quick. So first off, and these guys are probably my favorites, the mini demi-humans. They like to try to blend in into tall grass and hide amongst livestock and other wildlife, and they carry a massive Bowie knife as big as their arm, so I don't know, there's just something really cool about them, and obviously their primary skill is to try and sneak up and get a critical hit or a backstab on the player, so watch out for that. But they're pretty easy to spot, even if they are hiding amongst the wildlife. I just think it's a really cool little detail that they, sort of try to blend in. This is best witnessed at the Craftsman's Shack side of Grace, right near the Hermit Village, where they've, sacked an entire town of what I believe to be celebrants. More on that later. Yeah, these guys are really cool. They sort of move like a miniature version of the Demi-Human War Chief, which we will be talking about shortly. Anyway, moving on. Next up is what I like to call the Demi-Human Regulars. Now these guys are great examples of what the average Demi-Human looks like. They've got these pointed, canine, or perhaps goblin-esque ears, sharp fangs, and ape-like kind of face. They certainly look like Elden Ring's take on your classical goblin race. And much like the smaller counterparts I just went over, these guys are natural scavengers. I mean, just look at their weapon choice. I definitely don't think the demi-humans are crafting these blades. Anyway, like most other demi-humans, they can often be found carrying string. In fact, they're probably one of the best sources of it in the game, so that's something worth remembering if you're going to do one of them consumable builds. Sometimes they wear white paint on their face, which to me is very similar to some of the beastmen you encounter much later in the game in Fair Missoula. So perhaps the demi-humans as a whole are the result of breeding between regular humans and the beastmen, but we'll speculate on that more as we go. Anyway, these guys are often carrying falchions, and you can usually find them in groups, not usually leading the patrols, but almost always making up the bulk force of it. They're commonly encountered with these guys, who are referred to as the veteran regs. These guys are pretty distinguishable from other demi-humans, as they appear to be wearing a makeshift brigand's hood that obscures one of their eyes. This is especially noticeable at night when the demi-human's blood boils and their eyes glow red. These guys, you'll only see one of their eyes glowing. Anyway, as the next rank up of demi-human, they've got a better weapon than a falchion. They've got the club. But to them it looks like a large club because of how big it is and how small they are. The most senior and toughest of these are often bestowed a spiked club, sort of a symbol of office, but these guys are often found sifting through junk or grass or just patrolling alongside their non-veteran counterparts. Now the next step up the ladder is the mighty demi-humans. These guys are the biggest of the regular non-chief, non-queen demi-humans, and they're almost entirely found wielding that spiked club as a sign of their seniority. They have the same general look as the regulars, just bigger. Very primitive, very ape-like, very goblin-esque. Meanwhile, their leadership, on the other hand, looks like they're growing beast snouts and are possibly related to rune bears or wolves of some kind. but we'll get to them next. In fact, there's a good chance that the demi-human, at least the lesser ones, the ones that aren't chiefs or queens, are basically a different subspecies of demi-human perhaps, essentially the worker bees of the species, which would also explain why they don't grow to the size of the queens and chieftains, although I suppose it is possible that as a demi-human ages he gets more animalistic as the years go by, and perhaps only a handful ever grow to be about chieftain size, and when they do they've already got the snout. I mean, honestly, who knows? There's a whole lot of speculation that could be done there. Next, we've got the war chiefs, who are second only to the queens. These individuals fight ferociously with a pair of twin daggers, not unlike their miniature counterparts. They're essentially the military leaders of the tribes, and in the absence of a queen, they become the de facto leaders of the group. And true to their name, the chieftains can often be found leading bands of their smaller comrades in enemy territory, presumably on behalf of their queen. And as a rule, these chiefs are always bigger than their charges, most commonly the lesser demi-human chief, but some, like the ones in the coastal cave, are capable of growing almost as large as a queen. And just like with the queens, usually dropping one of these makes all the other demi-humans in the area surrender and cower, although some of the mighty ones might remain disobedient. But let's get on to the queens. There's really only a handful of these members of demi-human royalty, and they're sort of scattered across the map. They have a truly unique appearance even amongst their own kind. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, the chiefs and queens are noticeably distinct from other demi-humans, even apart from the obvious size differences, being more beast-like and much lankier than their lesser comrades. For example, the regular demi-humans have hands for feet like monkeys in real life, whereas the legs of the queens and chiefs are turning more dog/cat-like, which is reflected in how they stand and move around, although it isn't clear if they're part dog, part wolf, part bear, or part lion, maybe even all of the above. They're clearly part beast. In any case, they're much more formidable than the smaller ones, so it's not hard to see why the lesser demigods surrender if you take out one of the leaders. It seems as though the demi-humans themselves have a very bee-like society, and from what I can tell, there are no female grunt demi-humans. The only female demi-humans we meet are the queens. And while they all have the same general appearance, there are some differences. For example, the ones in the Lux Ruins and the Volcano Cave both have glowing purple eyes, which I think hint that they can see in the dark. Now, there is one thing that all demi-human queens have in common, and it's that they were taught sorcery by sorcerers from Raya Lucaria. This was seemingly done for shits and giggles in the similar vein to how we teach gorillas sign language in real life, although from the description of the staff, I'd say the sorcerers were a little bit more mean-spirited about it. Another thing all the queens have in common are the strange tribal-like markings, or tattoos perhaps, that they're covered in. This could simply be a demi-human tradition. Maybe these demi-humans are given these markings when they're first appointed to be queen. But one interesting thing I noticed was that these markings bear a striking resemblance to the patterns on the armor of the Bloodhound Knights. This is curious because the Bloodhound Knights are certainly very beast-like, much like the demi-humans. They even move in a similar manner. Perhaps the Bloodhound Knights were demi-humans who were raised away from their tribes. They look like they might even be chieftain tier demi-humans. Maybe they were taken from their tribes by some of the noble houses, or alternatively they were traded to the noble houses by the demi-humans, maybe even in exchange for magical knowledge. And these Bloodhound Knights go on to fashion their own armor with this intricate little design that closely mimic the same tattoos that the demi-human queens have, sort of in honor of their heritage. Plus, the demi-human concept art sort of depicts one without its helmet, although far away. You can clearly see they've got a beast-style head reminiscent of the demi-human chieftains or even the queens, although I will concede it is still a bit more dog-like than those demi-human heads. Perhaps the similarities in the symbol on the armor and the symbol on the tattoo is just a coincidence. I mean, that's always a possibility. Anyway, though, the most imposing of all demi-humans is always going to be the queens. As the surprisingly capable leaders of the demi-humans, the queens, much like the chess piece that is their namesake, have a variety of tricks up their sleeve. Obviously, they're formidable fighters, but they also appear to be quite cunning. Perhaps this cleverness is instinctual or inborn, but their ability to practice magic suggests that they do possess a higher degree of intelligence than at the very least most, if not all, of the lesser demi-humans, with maybe the exception of the chiefs and Bach. The queens also seem fairly adept at controlling their territories for the most part, and even expanding in some cases. But when it comes to actually fighting, due to their big, lanky sizes, the queens aren't as agile as the chiefs and have to move around somewhat awkwardly, crawling and whatnot. This obviously has an effect on their combat prowess, but they're able to supplement their abilities with magic being on their side after the sorceress taught the queens magic to broker peace, quote unquote. And as it turned out, the queens had an aptitude for spells, mostly simple stuff like the glintstone pebble, but they eventually mastered the crystal burst, which required an understanding of the faint cognition of the crystallians, meaning they're able to at least partially understand or interpret some of the stone's wisdom. However, if a queen takes enough of a beating, she'll forego her magical knowledge altogether, hucking her staff at the player and going into a more animalistic fighting stance, where they essentially fight like a cornered beast. And when they're in this state, they're actually incredibly mobile and fast for a creature of that size, so watch out. But usually by that point, they're almost dead anyway, so. Moving on. So there are 5 known demi-human queens across the lands between. Some of them even have names like Gillica, Margot, and Maggie, and others prefer to remain nameless. Each one seemingly controls that region's tribe of demi-humans. Interestingly enough, there's even a couple of clans of demi-humans who appear to be operating without a queen, like the ones found in the mountaintops of Giants and Caelid. Now, there is of course the possibility that these groups could be a part of one of the larger tribes sent to scavenge these wastelands. Seems less likely for the mountaintops given its inaccessible nature, but could definitely be the case for the rather small band found in Caelid. In both of these instances, though, they seem to have come into conflict with another race of scavengers known as the Winged Dames and their hordes of giant bats. Now, the demi-humans usually make short work of the giant bats, but without the help of a queen, the dames, well, they're a little too formidable for a lesser band of demi-humans. This is especially evident for the ones found in Caelid, as they even lack a demi-human chief. Or perhaps they set out with one and he got killed by the winged dames. Wouldn't be surprising given their current state. They appear to have been pushed into a smoldering plateau, essentially trapped by the winged dames, where they're seemingly devising some sort of plan to get out of here. I mean, they're flanked on one side by ghostly sorcerers, behind them is a jar-chucking troll, and ahead of them are the winged dames who presumably pushed them into this plateau in the first place. Now, this scavenging party could have been sent by the queen in Fort Hate before she was killed, or perhaps the queen all the way down in the Weeping Peninsula. It isn't all that clear. All we know is that they don't appear to have fared very well. Likewise, the tribe on the mountaintops of Giants, who might be the natives of the region, or perhaps a leftover of the forces that fought a great battle there, or perhaps their descendants. Doesn't really matter what their backstory is, though they aren't doing much better than their buddies over in Caelid. These fellows in this snowy wasteland are also lacking any form of a chieftain or a queen, so they tend to follow the mighty demi-humans as their leadership. They tend to only occupy that crevice that leads up to the lofty shack where you fight Dialos' brother, where there's a bunch of guardian golems walking around. The golems don't appear to have any problem with the demi-humans, and this particular tribe of demi-human survivors in the mountaintops are probably the most durable and overall toughest specimens of their entire species. Sort of one of those pressure makes diamond situations, because these guys are out here in this in the harshest of climates. They naturally became the strongest of their kind. And as far as I can tell, the group is too large to simply be a scavenging party that was set up from one of the other regions. And perhaps this horde's lack of any visible signs of leadership like chieftains or queens is just a visible sign of how poorly they're doing up there. As it stands, though, these fellows are a lot better off than the unfortunate group in Caelid. Poor bastards are stranded on a burning hillside. Now, it's definitely pretty bad to be a demi-human in Caelid or the mountaintops, but compare this to the scavenging party sent into Liurnia. After recently slaughtering a noble sorcerer and setting up shop on an island just south of the scenic Isle Site of Grace where Patches likes to hang out, this decent-sized war party can be found led by a chieftain, and they're kind of just chilling on this island. Now, I'm not saying that they're thriving or that there's even a lot of them, but they're definitely doing better than their cousins over in Caelid. And they've still got their chief. Tough to say which queen they serve, though. Anyway, though, moving back on to the queens. There's a nameless one leading a tribe in the aptly named Demi-Human ruins found in the Weeping Peninsula. This group appears to keep mostly to itself and has little conflicts with the other inhabitants of the Weeping Peninsula, like the Misbegotten or the inhabitants of the Ailing Village, a place they've likely been advised by their queen to steer clear of because of its plagued nature. They also don't appear to venture anywhere near Castle Morn for their own safety, but the occasional patrol does run afoul of the Godric garrison of soldiers at the tower overlooking the forest that their ruins are hidden within, which usually results in the demi-human patrol getting pelted with crossbow bolts until they retreat or are killed. There's also another as of yet unnamed demi-human queen found dead at Fort Haight, presumably killed by the blood-mad Godric knight who had seized the place with a small host of soldiers. We can actually see some of her loyal demi-human soldiers mounting an insufficient siege in an effort to avenge her, while others, presumably from this same tribe, are fighting the Godric soldiers all across Limgrave. The band in the coastal cave is also presumably a part of this demi-human tribe, but if that is the case, then why weren't the war chiefs there when the queen died? Maybe they abandoned her on the battlefield, leaving her to her fate, while taking as many demi-humans as they could to set up shop down in that cave, perhaps to either consolidate their power or just lead the tribe from there. It isn't really that clear, but I like to speculate on these little details. And that's just assuming that the two war chiefs were disloyal. I mean, maybe the queen ordered them to flee with most of the demi-humans. I mean, that doesn't seem likely, but it's at least a possibility. Now, the named demi-human queen, Margot, commands her tribe from the Lux ruins after presumably striking a bargain with a Tibia mariner, or maybe the demi-humans were there first and the boatman made a deal with them. Either way, though, the exterior of this location is patrolled by a boatman capable of summoning a giant skeleton, so beware. But other than that, this tribe seems to just mind their own business as well. Margot is notably a glowing-eyed demi-human queen, however, but moving on. Queen Gillica leads her tribe from the Volcano Cave located in Mount Gelmir, an active volcano that she shares with at least one other demi-human queen. Now, unfortunately for Gillica, not far from the entrance to her lair is heavily contaminated by the Flame of Frenzy. And while we aren't really sure if the demi-humans are even affected by the Flame of Frenzy, Queen Gillica doesn't appear to be taking any chances, and is keeping her forces close to home, foregoing any chances of scavenging or pillaging, instead choosing to keep her clan safe from the frenzied soldiers and the blighted land. She really drew the short straw when she split the mountain with the other demi-human queen, who's actually doing pretty well. Now, it's worth noting Gillica also has glowing eyes, and I'm starting to think that this is just meant to show that the demi-human queens can see in the dark. But anyway, moving on to the final named queen, demi-human queen Maggie, who even if encountered at night does not have glowing eyes. She could be blind, that'd be pretty cool. Perhaps the most proactive out of the bunch, and has the best name, Maggie has a unique advantage that other demi-human queens don't. Namely, the former disciples of Grandmaster Azur, a group of runaway or otherwise displaced sorcerers. With their help, Maggie has led her very powerful tribe to victory recently over a village of celebrants. Celebrants are, of course, the godskin-worshipping, skin-flaying, A24 Midsummer-style enemies, famously found in the Dominula windmill village and the other lesser windmills found throughout the Altus Plateau. Azur's presence here suggests that maybe the queen sought out his stone-like wisdom as counsel regarding the attack on this hermit village. Now, I believe this is the only place in the game where the complex relationship between a group of sorcerers and a tribe of demi-humans is depicted. It's talked a bit about in descriptions here and there. I mean, I always got the vibe that the sorcerers really only taught the demi-human queens magic as sort of a gag. You know, just to see if it was possible. Kind of like how the first humans were probably trying to teach gorillas how to use sign language and shit like that. I don't know, I'm not knowledgeable on the topic. But that was the vibe I got at first, and it probably was the attitude several of the sorcerers had. But these sorcerers hanging out with the demi-humans in Hermit Village seem to be members of the tribe, sort of. Honorary members, essentially. Yeah, they're obviously exerting influence over it and kind of controlling it, possibly. But I think the real reason they're there is because they can't return to Raya Lucaria Academy because the doors have been sealed. No one in or out while the war rages on, although there are obviously ways to circumvent this. Plus, there's also the fact that Azur and presumably his disciples as well were driven from the academy, or fled at the very least, so that they could, quote, practice their heretical magic elsewhere. The primeval current and the study and reverence of it was no longer welcome at the College of Raya Lucaria anymore. So these unfortunate disciples of a very legendary Grandmaster have been left without a home, presumably forced to thug it out in the wilds and fend for themselves. It's not hard to see why they sought out this demi-human tribe and established a mutually beneficial relationship. These sorcerers seem content to stay with the demi-humans because they really don't have much of a choice. And shit, maybe that's why they convinced the queen to attack the hermit village in the first place. I mean, assuming she did attack it on their urging. Maybe these guys wanted a village to live in as opposed to the woods or some shitty crystal cave, and knew that befriending this demi-human tribe, teaching the queen some magic, could make that possibility a reality for them. Or maybe these sorcerers just went a bit native, they're curtsying out. Perhaps after seeing the horrors of what the lands between had to offer, these guys simply just went a little nuts, and now are acting as sort of advisors to this demi-human queen. I mean, we see pretty clearly how the lesser demi-humans revere these sorcerers. It wouldn't be too hard to believe for that to have gone to their head a bit. And honestly, why shouldn't it have? These guys were the disciples of Grandmaster Azur. The guy who made the strongest spell in the game. It was probably his idea in the first place to live amongst the demi-humans. I only didn't mention him earlier because he's not doing much of anything anymore. He's just kind of chilling, which is well-deserved, I'd assume, after going through what he's presumably gone through, cosmically and whatnot. But it's not hard to see why demi-human Queen Maggie is in the best possible position, at least compared to her other contemporary demi-human queens. She's got the backing of a bunch of disciples of a Grandmaster of Sorcery. I mean, it's not rocket science. Now, before we start wrapping things up, there's one final thing I wanted to get to. Why does their blood boil at night? I know we mentioned it briefly in the beginning, but let's expand a little bit. Obviously, there's no definitive answer, at least that I can find. But we can speculate, which you guys know I sure love to do. Personally, I think they have some connection with the Sun Realm, an area that has since fallen into obscurity after an attempt to drain the sun of its power on order of Miquella in an effort to resurrect his slain demigod kin, Godwyn. This doesn't appear to have worked, however, but the sun, or at least the seat of the sun, has faded into obscurity. It seems as though Castle Sol's main purpose was dedicated to draining the sun of its power. Miquella stashed an army of undying, ghostly banished knights and some Albinorics there for, I'm assuming, the express purpose of guarding this project. But even by the events of the base game, this doesn't appear to have been successful, and we see Godwyn in his current state, and he sure as hell doesn't look resurrected, at least in the traditional sense. I believe the demi-humans to at least possibly be the descendants of the original inhabitants of the Sun Realm, which I believe has something to do with the omen horns and the beast-like quality of the crucible. I don't quite have enough information to make a full theory on that, but I'm working on it. Which reminds me, this human and beast hybridization-like design of the demi-human is very similar in appearance to that of the lion dancer from the trailer for Shadow of the Erdtree. And while the demi-humans obviously lack omen horns, some of them do wear goat horns on their back, namely the chieftains, and maybe they do this to evoke the appearance of an omen horn, like the ones on the lion dancer. The glowing eyes on some of the queens is also very reminiscent of the eyes on the lion puppet, but as far as I can tell, that's where the similarities end. If I missed anything, please let me know in the comments. You guys know I love that shit. So the demi-humans, they're not a complicated bunch. The majority of their interactions with the outside world can be summed up with one word: conflict. But it's not like most of the groups they come into conflict with are any good anyway. The demi-humans are territorial. They only really beef with people when they cross into their territory. So you can't really fault them if they occasionally ambush you as you cross through the map or ride through the roads or, ride near Mount Ylmir. They're even known for using rune bears as part of their ambush traps. Oh yeah, and lastly, while their relations to beastmen are questionable at best, the similarities can't be ignored and must be brought into consideration, but aren't really definitively proving in whether or not the demi-humans are an offshoot race of beastmen or if they are the offspring of beastmen and human relations. There's no real definitive answer. I actually don't think there's that much of a connection between the two races, but the evidence can't be ignored and it must be considered. So as underwhelming as it is, I don't really have any definitive answers, as usual, with this topic, but it's something that's fun to speculate about. But I believe that's everything I wanted to say about demi-humans. Now, I know I said I'd have this video up like a week ago, but it's been a really, really hectic past couple weeks. I know I say that a lot. But unfortunately, that does not stop it from being the case. I am looking forward to a lot more free time soon, and that Aldia video will be the next video that comes up. And I know I said I wouldn't mention it again, but it's up next. Anyway though, I hope you guys found the video to be at least somewhat amusing or entertaining or informative, and if you liked it, please like it. If you disliked it, please dislike it, and if you like hearing me ramble on about various obscure topics in video games or movies occasionally, please consider subscribing. We're about to hit 26k. That's of course a big deal. But enough of all that, let's have our outro and then some final thoughts, shall we? Alright though, so I found out super late that Elden Ring was having that whole trailer contest. Basically, if you make the best video, you get some sort of cool prize. I think the first place is like a 10-foot statue of Mesmer. Now, I don't even know where I would put such a thing. Not that I'm arrogant enough to think I would win such a contest, but still, if on the off chance that I did, where the hell would I put such a statue? But yeah, as you guys know, the next big lore video is going to be Aldia. I'm not going to do anything else until that's done. There might be a submission to that contest that I come out with if I can finish it by tomorrow or tonight. But that's not really a lore video. I don't even think that'll have any voiceover. It'll just be music and cool cinematic scenes. Now, I know this isn't really lore related, but I just watched Guy Ritchie's The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, and I've got some thoughts. So first of all, I thought it was like a better version of Inglourious Basterds, a movie I do enjoy. It has some great performances. I mean, not all of them. Looking mainly at you, Eli Roth. But I've always enjoyed Inglourious Basterds. My one problem with it was that it was advertised as mainly being about the bastards. But as it turned out, they were just a moderately small part of a much bigger movie with a lot of moving pieces. Again, there's nothing wrong with that. But I definitely found this to be the better movie, which I guess is going to be the unpopular opinion, right? I don't know, there's something that was just undeniably charming about this movie. Now, of course, it's not getting anywhere near the buzz it should be getting, or even the best reviews. But I've never really been one to let Rotten Tomatoes do my thinking for me. But that's like a whole other story about how critics sometimes miss the mark and are sometimes biased. That's all irrelevant here. I'm just sharing my own opinion. I mean, I thought this was a great return to form for Guy Ritchie. Not that his last movie was bad or anything. I enjoyed The Gentleman a lot, and I thought it could be his best movie in the past 20 years, but I think that title belongs to The Ministry. And I would say his best work ever is probably the Gentleman TV series on Netflix. I mean, that was really, really enjoyable, and I wasn't expecting it to be that good. Both The Ministry and The Gentleman, the movie and the show, deserve their own videos whenever I decide to start covering film. But until then, this little micro rant at the end of a lore video will have to suffice. It's honestly kind of surprising how many things this movie does share in common with Inglourious Basterds, like an actress helping them with their plot. This movie's got its fair share of great performances too. Personally, I thought Henry Cavill was acting his damn heart out, playing quite possibly the coolest character I've ever seen him portray, so that's definitely a plus. There's just something really enjoyable watching him mow down all these people and laugh like a madman while he's doing it. Great work from him. Then you've got Amazon's Reacher playing a Danish soldier who's just the definition of badass. He's probably everything that Donnie Donowitz was supposed to be in Inglourious Basterds, in my humble opinion. But then again, Anders Lassen was a real person, and from what I've read, he actually really was that badass. So, I don't know, great casting choice though. He absolutely killed it. We've also got Cary Elwes from The Princess Bride, and he was also really great in Guy Ritchie's other recent movie, Operation Fortune, which I really enjoyed. It wasn't like one of his best movies ever, but it was definitely quite enjoyable. Like I said, I usually like Guy Ritchie's movies. Just for a little bit there, he was losing me with stuff like Wrath of Man, or in the early 2000s, Revolver. Those two movies in particular, I think they really... But yeah, I've ranted long enough about this movie. You guys should go see it, because I'll probably be making a video about it soon. Let me know what you thought if you did see it. Maybe you disagree with me. Maybe you agree with me. But I'll be back real soon, and as always, I hope you guys be safe, and I'll see ya.